While there are many writings that could be understood as the birth of Tolkien's Legendarium, there are only 4, written as early as 1914, that can truly claim this title. These are 4 poems written by Tolkien during the Great War, and they predate the Book of Lost Tales, the Silmarillion, as well as Tolkien's first coherent story with the fall of Gondolin. Their protagonist, none other than Earendil, the Evening Star, known to us later as Earendil the Mariner, father of Elrond and Elros. Like many of Tolkien's earlier stories, these poems were not meant to be part of a wider world at all, and we can only connect them back to Middle-earth and Arda retroactively, as Tolkien used his earlier ideas when he decided to construct a coherent narrative and world for his Silmarillion, and the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit that he attached to it. The very first, and perhaps most important of these poems, was Eala Earendil Engla Berthast, also known as the Voyage of Earendil the Evening Star, or this Old English I will not even attempt to pronounce. The poem was written in September of 1914, while J.R.R. Tolkien was still studying at Oxford. It is made up of 6 stanzas, and for those who have delved into the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, at least the first few pages, it is to this poem that Tolkien refers to while writing to his future wife Edith in November of 1914 in letter number 2. In the letter, he describes sharing this poem with the Oxford Essay Club, describing that Earendil was well criticized by his peers. Regardless, this poem is not only instrumental due to its position as Tolkien's very first in what ultimately became the Legendarium, but because within it we can see traces of countless things that we will come to recognize in the Silmarillion itself. Earendil leaving the continent, the light emanating from him and his ship, as well as the journey of the sun and the moon, which were themselves vessels. The poem begins by describing the beginning of Earendil's journey through the night sky, flying atop his ship and looking like a radiant star. He starts at what we may now retroactively recognize as Beleriand, or Westerland as Tolkien puts it in the poem itself. He threaded his path o'er the aftermath of the splendor of the sun, and wandered far past many a star in his gleaming galleon. On the gathering tide of darkness ride the argosies of the sky, and spangle the night with their sails of light as the streaming star goes by. The Evening Star carries on his journey to the far west, what we may now recognize as Valinor, and his long flight is described by Tolkien as an endless quest over the margin of the world itself. Earendil is not hindered by the length or difficulty of his journey, and as the day passes and dusk arrives, its golden light fills his heart with fire and with a burning desire to complete his mission. At this point, his exact mission, or at least its purpose, is not precisely explained. We are simply thrust into a situation in which Earendil begins his flight from Middle-earth to Valinor, or at least what became Middle-earth and Valinor. From Tolkien's future writings, we learn that this journey was to request the aid of the Valar in the fight against the Dark Lord Morgoth, a request that was ultimately granted. In some of the earliest versions of this story, however, as described in the abandoned Tale of Earendil of the Book of Lost Tales, Earendil was somewhat unsuccessful in his mission. You see, the elves of Valinor had already decided to sail to Middle-earth and help their peers, before Earendil ever arrived on their shores, thus rendering his entire quest redundant. He also didn't have a Silmaril, and never reunited with his wife Elwing. And these are just some versions and outlines of unfinished material that were reworked numerous times before being abandoned. Thankfully, in my opinion at least, Tolkien remade his Earendil's arc when he began writing the Silmarillion. Regardless, the poem continues with the coming of the moon, and specifically the Ship of the Moon, as those familiar with the Legendarium will recognize. Similarly to the sun, the moon was set up on a flying vessel that journeyed the skies, and the two were not celestial bodies. This idea will eventually evolve into the ships being manned by two Myra that loved each other, but could never be together in the sky, That is, except for during an eclipse, when they finally dared. In the second to last stanza, we get an idea about what's happening in the rest of the world. The moon scares Earendil and he flees from it, quickly falling beyond the edge of the earth and disappearing from its sight. While there, in the darkest part of the ocean, at the edge of the world, he can still hear the people he has left behind. He can hear their happiness and the falling of their tears, says Tolkien, as the world that Earendil knew slowly fades in a dark mist and time passes without him. But then something happens. Then he glimmering past to the starless vast, as an islet lamp at sea, and beyond the ken of mortal men, set his lonely errantry, striking the sun in his galleon through the pathless firmament, till his light grew old in abysses cold, and his eager flame was spent. Earendil is a star. It is his duty to perform this journey each night, and he travels west alongside the sun, and the sun grants him the strength to carry on. As the sun sets, however, Earendil is left alone with the moon, and he is dreadfully afraid of its shipment, and he goes to hide beneath the world, where he can neither be seen nor found. Regardless, time passes and people live their lives, until the moon leaves the skies once more, and the sun is again triumphant. Once more, Earendil tracks his movements, and he does so for countless years, until, that is, his light gradually fades in the cold darkness, and his bright spirit is exhausted. From this, we can only ask, how is Earendil the Evening Star? He is obviously described as the morning star instead. The truth is, Earendil and his ship are both the evening and the morning star. That is because, if you read the poem, you will see that Tolkien has Earendil follow in the footsteps of the real morning and evening star, the planet Venus. Venus is often called a star, despite being a planet in modern terms. Throughout most of history, however, the Greek planetes were understood to mean wanderers or wandering stars. Venus is nearer to the sun than Earth, and therefore it always appears during the day near the bright sun. As the rotation takes place, it sometimes appears east of the sun itself, and can thus be seen during the late evening with the setting of the sun. This is exactly how Tolkien describes the journey of Earendil so eloquently. He journeys with the sun, but remains in the sky for a little while, until the moon scares him away for the remainder of the night. As I said in the beginning of the video, this poem is but one of 4 that expand on the story of this star that Tolkien calls Earendil, a name he took from the language of the Anglo-Saxons to describe the very same star. He loved the idea of this star being personified so much that he actually turned him into a character when he began writing his more coherent narratives, and primarily The Fall of Gondolin. Ultimately, these poems give you an important perspective into Tolkien's creative process. He gained random inspiration to write something small, and then he felt the need to explain it, and then explain those explanations. Afterwards, he wrote more and more. He began to utilize names and stories from his earlier drafts in his future writings, until finally getting the idea to unite everything under one consistent and coherent umbrella that he himself called the Legendarium. This is exactly how characters such as Elrond, the son of Earendil, as well as that whole mythology, was imported into The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Make sure to let me know if you'd like me to cover the rest of Earendil's story in Tolkien's 3 remaining poems. A massive thank you to my channel members, and thank you very much for watching.